Okay, let's do a little bit more work on the nose. We want to add some more shading, and we're going to add some highlighting to that. So I'm going to go back again with our red and the blending medium and softly work over that again. And I'm going to pull this layer up a little bit more into the yellow. And again, that will also help tone down the red-violet if you got too much on there. And I want to pull some like little ridges. Like carrots have little, lots of little ridges in them. So I'm just kind of working up on the edge of my brush. And looking for little spots along the edge of the carrot that look like it might be the start of a little ridge or a section of the carrot. And this is just a hint of some little dividers. And you can also pull some from the top down. But hopefully you can see where that gives our carrot a little bit more texture. Okay, I took a break for a second to let my nose dry. We're going to do some dry brushing on it to add some highlights and a little bit of dry brushing on the star. Now I like to use, there's all kinds of different brushes you can use to dry brush, but I usually use like a Royal Sable Round, or they have a new one called a Royal Sable Tech Round. The difference is that the Royal Sable Rounds are a natural bristle brush and the Sable Techs are synthetic. Now this one is an old one that I've been using forever, and it's flattened down to, it looks like somebody just chopped it off, but it used to be kind of a rounded, pointed round brush. So use whatever you like, but we're going to dry brush some white here on the tip of or the top edge of the nose. And you want a brush that's completely dry. To load it, I just tip just the very end of it. I don't put much paint on it. You can see it's just a little bit on the end. And then I find a clean spot on my palette, and I just work that in a circular swirling motion until that paint gets kind of distributed into the brush real evenly. Now you can always take a paper towel and just lightly brush off the tip of that brush so it doesn't have anything that will chunk up on your painting. And then you're going to just softly brush over the area you want to deposit some of that paint on. Sometimes I'll work in a circular motion. Sometimes, just depending on the area, I might do it in a horizontal stroke. So we're going to do some here on this center of the star. And you'll find that this dry brushing is another way to soften everything. So you can see here we've added just a little glow to the center. We've added a little bit of highlight to the top of the nose. So I'm going to set that aside. Now the nose, I still want a little bit stronger highlight on, so I'm going to take a round brush with a little bit of water in it. Just pulling that out. And I'm going to just work up on the tip and just do a sort of a squiggle line down through the center of that dry brushing. I want to add just a stronger highlight out to the end. You might go over this a couple times to build it up, but it's just just an irregular squiggly back and forth and pull it out to that end. So now we've got kind of a sharp little highlight over top of our dry brushing. To do a little more detail on the face, I'd like to do a little shading on the eyes and on the mouth. So you can use a 3/8 inch or a 1/4 inch angle brush. Let's see, let's move over this way a little bit. I came in closer and my palette kind of ran off the camera. So I'm going to just use some of the medium gray that we did as the base coat back here. And just add a little tip of that to the corner of my angle brush. Again, we're working that out like a side load on the brush. So we have paint on the long tip and just the blending medium on the short tip. Push this aside a little bit. And I want to come along, and we've got a little eyelid here above the snowman's eye. So I'm going to just float a little bit of gray, sort of like a C stroke, or a U stroke, whatever you want to call it, above the eye. We're going to repeat that on both sides. And that just defines his eyelid a little bit. And then we're going to do a similar thing on each of the little coals. We want to give it a little shadow like it's set back into his face, pushed in. Getting a little dry here. So I'm adding some more blending medium and a little bit of paint. And we're just going to work around the left side of each of those coals. Gives like a little cast shadow. And if you need to reinforce it on his to the side of his nose, you can go back over that a little bit. The other things we're going to do to the eye is to outline it with some black. And I'm using water mixed in with the black to make it very inky. You want it to just flow off your brush, but make sure you don't have any drips of water that have collected on the end of the ferrule, because you don't want that to slide down the brush and make a blob on your painting. But we're going to look at where the eye was transferred, the corners of it, and I'm working right up on the tip of my brush because I want a very fine line, and I'm just going to trace around the top of that line, that eye to the corner, and then across the bottom. Repeat that on both sides. So now you can see his eye is fully shaped in there. If you want to add a little bit of shadow underneath the eye, you can do that also. Let's see. Let's pick up a little bit more of this gray. Each time I do one of these, it comes out a little different, but I'm looking at my original one, and I did have a little bit of a shadow floated down here. Extend this under the nose a little bit more too. I think it makes the snowman prettier if you add a little bit of lashes to them. So I always do my lashes, I always start kind of on this outer corner, and I'm working right up on the tip of my brush. I'm using a 20-aught liner brush that's maybe a 1/2 inch long. And you have to work really quickly, but I kind of pull down the side of that eye and just flip it out to get that first lash in. And then I'll work above it and below it. And I want to stagger the length of the lashes. I don't want them all evenly spaced or the same length out here. I want the next one I'll do a little short, maybe a little longer. And as I work up, I get progressively shorter and stop about midway at the top of the eye, maybe not quite to the center. And then I can pull a couple more down here and maybe a couple little short ones on the bottom lid. But again, I keep them all to the outer corner of the eye. I don't come back all the way across. And then turn it around and try to get the other side put in about the same length and shape. And sometimes that's a little bit more tricky, but again, I'm going to pull the first one down and flip it out, and that one got pretty long. I think I'll clean that one off a little bit. I don't want them too long. And again, stagger the length of them so that they're not all the same. And just work around to the top. I'll go back with some white paint and clean that one up a little bit. And just a couple little short ones here along the bottom edge, about halfway over. Okay, I'm going to pick up a little white paint and just try to camouflage the end of that. I might need to go back and put some shading back in over that, but you can camouflage your mistakes. So there, it's softening that one up a little bit. And then to make the eyes sparkle, you want to put some little shine marks in it. So I usually do a dot and then a smaller dot right under it at the upper right. This is my formula. I always tend to do them on the upper right. So you can see where that adds a little bit of sparkle to the eye. And then I like to do a little dry brushy stroke over here that kind of crosses the bottom left of the eye or the pupil. So it and I'll do maybe 2 or 3 of those to stagger the length of them. Gives kind of the effect of a shine on glass, I guess. And then if I want to, I might sharpen up that nose just a little bit more, add another layer of that zigzaggy highlight. So there you can see it's getting very shiny looking. And I would do some real fine outlining on the nose with the black. And when I do this outlining, I don't try to stay right on the edge. I try to keep it loose, so you can see I'll drag it off the edge and move it around and break the line. Just kind of follow the general direction. But letting it come on and off the nose just gives a little more movement to your painting. Then you can just very lightly come along and pull some little dark lines up those little grooves that you had previously shaded, so it looks like the nose has some sections to it. And I'm not going all the way across the nose, and then on the mouth, I like some little detail outlining also. And again, I don't want to be right on the edge, because on these black coals you wouldn't see them anyway. So I'm going to come just up off the top of it a little bit and do a little line halfway around that coal. So I'm coming off the left top, just coming around and tapering it back down a little bit. And then we can add some shine marks to those that are basically the same as what we have in the eye. Do a couple dots here at the top right. And I'm just using the tip of my liner. I don't like them with a stylus because they get so even. I like something a little more irregular. And then brush off a little of the paint on the brush, and we're going to do some little light streaks of the white here at the bottom left. And other little things you can do, you can add a little dot here to the inside of the eye. Just make it a little corners, define them a little bit more. And you can do some outlining around the star. Again, I don't try to stay right on the edge, it's very loose. So you can see, you know, I'm not, one side I'm on the star, this side I've come off of the star. And we're going to outline all of the hat the same way. We're going to come out here along this outer edge and the same as the hat band. And you can do the edge of the snowman and this outer edge of the scarf. Now I like to repeat some of the outlining in white because I think it softens everything up. So again, I'm going to use some white on my liner brush, and I'm mixing some water in it so that it's inky. And I'm just going to go back and go over some of the outlining that I've already done. So like on the nose, I feel like the nose looks a little bit stark with that black outlining around it. So I'm just going to go back and repeat the outlining, but with the white. And I'm not, again, not trying to follow exactly where I did the lining before. I just want to break it up a little bit. And you can see how that white over top of it just softens it down a little bit. You can do that on the star. And also on the star with the white, I do some another little inner pinstripe. Just, you can dot it at these corners, but just to give a little more detail on that star. And then we'll go back and put some lettering on it with black. Again, we're going to go over the hat band. And we're just following the general black outlining we did before, but kind of breaking it up, meandering on and off of it and around the hat. You can put a little word in your star just to add a little more interest to it. I painted snow in it, but you could put flake or star or whatever word that you like. You can freehand it in there, or if you feel comfortable writing with a liner brush, you can just write it in. And then go back, and I'm just dotting the ends of the letters with black. It just finishes them off a little bit more. You don't see my little crooked edges. If you've lost any of your highlights in the hat or on the hat band or the scarf, you can always go back and dry brush some stronger highlights back into those. I'm fine with I think my hat and the hat band, but I think on the scarf I'd like to soften these down a little bit. So I'm gonna just dry brush a little bit of white on each side. It'll soften that all down. Maybe a little bit here on this tail. You do one spot and then you kind of sometimes decide, oh, I think it would look good if I did somewhere else. So the only other thing we need to do on the snowman is put some blush on her face. Maybe should have done that before, but it's okay now. We can put it in. So I'm just going to put a little bit of this blending medium down first, so we have something wet to work into. We don't want, just make sure everything's dry under there before you do it. Then I'm going to pick up a little bit of the red on the brush and work that out, because I don't want this to be very strong. And then I'm just going to brush that into that glazing medium and soften that out a little bit. You can decide how much you want her blushed. It's better to start with just a little bit and build it up than you get too much on the first go round. So there, she's got just a little slight pink to her cheeks. We'll let her dry real well, and while we're waiting, we will work on some of this background a little bit. We want to add some shading to that. So I'm going to put some dark gray value 3 out on my palette. Again, you don't need to have a bottle of this. You can always just mix gray and white to make a darker gray. That's what these mixes are made from, the titanium white and black, just in little different ratios. So same process, we're going to use a little blending medium on our brush, side lid with some of that dark gray, and you can see how much darker that is than our medium gray value. And we're just going to come along and start adding some shading to this background so it has some variations in color. So obviously we're going to do it up here underneath the lantern. I'm going to do some here on these bands. We want to do these outer edges and walk that in. Start on the outside edge, walk it in towards the middle. We want it to stay lighter here at the center and darken it on the outer edges to give it a sort of a rounded look. So you can see how we're dark on both sides and the center's light. It gives it a kind of a contoured look. And you're going to do that same thing here on the bottom one, bottom band. So I'm walking it out, I put it down, I move over maybe a ½ inch, bring it down, come back over another ½ inch, and just keep walking that towards the middle and patting it to blend each of those passes through. So we'll let those dry and come back here to the center, and we can just work some dark in around the edges of the snowman or snow lady. So I've got the paint against her. There's not much space here that we need to really do much of anything. We're just want a little variation in color. Gives it a little bit more interest. One other place that we need to shade is on this ring, and I just shade here against where it hits against the lantern and walk that up a little bit. Do that on both sides. And then we're going to work some on the burnt sienna part of the lantern. And we need to shade along the outside edges of this also, and we're going to use a darker brown. In an effort to keep our palette very limited, I'm just going to use the burnt sienna that we used on the lantern to start with, and I'm going to mix a little bit of black into it. Now if you prefer, you can use like a burnt umber or a raw umber to do that, but the burnt sienna with the black mixed in will give you about the same colors. First, when I brush mix, I just first load, I've got, again, the blending medium in the brush, and I'm loading it with some burnt sienna, and then I'm going to pick up just a tiny bit of black on the tip of my brush, and I'm going to work back into that same path. And you can see that black is very intense compared to the burnt sienna. So I'm going to pick up a little bit more burnt sienna, and we end up with sort of a raw umber color. And I'm going to come along and shade down each side of the lantern. This lantern's done very simply. We're just going to shade the outer edge of it, and we're going to add a little bit of light highlight here in the middle, and then stencil some snowflakes on it using black, so it'll give the effect that it's got snowflake cutouts in it. So we'll work this shading in about 2 or 3 layers to build it up. So I'm going to mix a little bit more of my black and burnt sienna. If you wanted to mix a puddle of this on your palette, you could do that. I just always find brush mixing easier. It doesn't matter, you know, it's not going to be a big deal if you don't have exactly the same shade mixed each time. In fact, having the variation adds a little more interest to your painting, because you're using the same colors, but you might just use a little different ratios of it in each time you mix it on your brush. And because we're using the blending medium in the mix, it helps make it transparent. And as we're putting it over top of the burnt sienna, that's going to show through and add to the mix also. So while a layer of one thing's drying, you can go back and work on a previous glaze that you put down. So let's go back to the gray bands, the metal bands, and add another layer of that dark gray to those. And remember, each layer you put over, it's going to look a little smoother. And then we'll go down to the bottom one and repeat it also. And I'm walking this dark gray about maybe a third of the way across that band. Okay, so we'll let that gray dry. And the last shading on the gray bands that we'll do is a little bit of black. That'll give us our darkest shading. And also pick up the blacks that we've used on the face and the coal teeth and in the eyes. If your burnt sienna areas are dry, you can go back and add the next layer of glaze on it. Again, using a touch of black and some burnt sienna to make a dark brown, like a raw umber color, to shade that with. Again, I'm mixing a touch of black with some burnt sienna. And I guess if you were looking for a ratio, it's probably maybe 1 part black to maybe 4 parts of burnt sienna. The black is very intense and very strong, so you don't need as much of it as you do of the burnt sienna, which is an earth tone and a weaker pigment. Now I'm just using some black, but I'm blending it. I didn't bother cleaning my brush, but I'm thinning it down with some of that blending medium so it's not too opaque. And I'm going to go back and add a final little shade on the gray areas. But I'm not going to walk this out as far. I'm just kind of keeping that right at the edges. So I'm not walking that over to the center like I did the dark gray. I just want this to be the very darkest shadow on the corners. Trying to get my lights adjusted so there's not so much glare on this. You can see that little bit of black on the edges here and how the dark that we've got on the edges of the lantern. Now to highlight the lantern, I'm going to use some of the yellows that we used as the undercoats for the star and the carrot nose. We used yellow ochre. That was this dirty yellow color, and I'm using again a big round Royal Sable Tech brush that I'm going to load a little bit of that yellow into and work it out on my palette so we get that distributed through the brush. And then I want to put some highlights in the lantern kind of here towards the just right of center. So I'm going to just want to make sure you don't have too much paint on that brush that it's going to glob on your surface. You want this soft. But I'm just going to start building up some highlights. I had a little glazing medium on there where it came over a little to the center, and it did get a little bit bunched. It wasn't quite dry there, so be careful of that. This is supposed to be a rusty old lantern, so it doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. Adding just some texture to this dry brush adds to the character of the lantern. So I'm working down around this snowflake at the bottom. So you want to kind of line up this highlight so that it's at about the same spot on each area as you work down. Now the next layer will be, I'm going to add a little bit of white into this yellow. We want to start lightening up just a little bit. So I'm just working in the same spot, but I'm going over and picking up just a little bit of white on the tip of the brush and blending that into that yellow. I brush off on the paper towel a little bit when I see it coming off a little too much. And I'm just swirling in clockwise and counterclockwise direction just to try to soften this highlight onto the lantern. And you'll find as the paint comes off, you'll have to start pressing harder and harder. Once it's softened down, you can work a little bit more out on either side just to blend it a little more. The final thing I did was add some streaks of white on the gray areas. And you can do that with, again, with the round brush. I'm not brushing it out quite so much. And this time I'm going to just pull like a straight stroke across the width of following the band. I'm not going to go all the way across, but I want to stay in this highlight area. So you can see how that white's giving it a shiny look. And you can build up a little bit more. But you want your strongest highlight right here in line with your golden colors that are on the rusty part of the lantern. And then let's come up here and do this band. And do a little tip here on the handle. And you can even go back over these golden areas and just do just a little bit of the white here at the centers. So that gives a real kind of rusty glow to the lantern. We can go back now on the center of the lantern, and I think we probably need to darken just a little bit more in here. So I'm going to use some of the black. Again, we want it thinned out with the blending medium because the black is pretty opaque if you don't have it thinned down. And again, we're just going to pick some areas that we want real dark darks. Remember those little triangle sections. I just want to pick a few areas in here just to make them a little darker than the rest. So can you see we've got some, just again in these little pointed spots where they create kind of a little triangle shape. I've just tucked in a little bit of that black glaze to give a little more dimension. So if there's any place else that you see that you want to add a little more shading or highlighting, you know, now's the time to do it. As I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, you know, I might even just add a little bit of black shading to a couple spots on the snowman. Make the outer edges of her scarf just a little darker. Add a little shadow up here underneath the lantern so that all kind of tucks in under that lantern. Add a little more purple down the sides here. Pick up a little more black. Again, work that out so it's transparent. We don't want it to be too heavy. There's just some areas here I'd like to have them disappear into the background just a little bit more. So I'm going to come here along the side of her face. Just want to lose that edge just a little bit. If you can see that a little more. Let me do a little bit on this side. Okay, so we're going to let her set up and dry, and then we'll come back and do the snowflake stencils and the, see, I just keep noodling. I'm just going to darken here under her hat just a little bit more. Okay, we're down to just a few little things that we need to do to finish our snowman. And the first one is, because she's supposed to be behind this glass in the lantern, we want to just tone down the edges a little bit with some of the gray that we used on the background. So I'm going to do some side loading, and I'm using the blending medium in my brush, some of the dark gray mix, and you want to brush that out so it's pretty transparent. You don't want it covering up too much. But then we're going to go back and just go over the edges and a few of these on the sides and at the top and bottom, just to give the effect that there's a layer of glass over top of her, so it's going to diffuse the light just a little bit. Don't want to tone down our shading too much there. So we go across the top, just a little down here on the sides to go a little bit over the edges of her hat and scarf. And pick up a little bit of the